So my name's Krista Bledsoe, and I'm the program manager for World IA Day in Tampa. So this is our first year, so thank you all for coming out. What we're going to do right now is have a panel discussion. So we have all of our speakers and a couple extra new faces that we'll introduce you to. And we're going to ask some questions. And we want to make this interactive, so if you guys do have questions, Amy will be walking around with a microphone, so just raise your hand and she'll come by and you guys can speak in the mic. Sheriana Griggs, who's also there, who's also in front. Sheriana, raise your hand. She's our social media director, and she's going to be taking questions from Twitter. So if you guys are shy and you don't want to speak on the mic, please feel free to post using our hashtag up there and ask away. So let me get started here and get situated. So first up, we have Lara. And Lara, she is our global executive producer for World IA Day all across the world for the 37 cities. So thank you so much, Laura, for being here. She's also an IA and UX researcher and designer for Fortune 500 companies. She also teaches user testing at Burbank's New York Film Academy and has UX Radio, which she does podcasting about IA, UX, and design. So welcome, Laura. Seth, who is also here, and he has 12 years of experience in IA and UX. He currently works at AgileThought, where he's the UX practice leader, and he also is a big contributor to the startup community in Tampa Bay. So he helps a lot of startups with design and UX work. So thank you, Seth. And then we have Karen, who is here, Karen Bachmann. Karen Bachmann has over a decade of experience in IA and UX. She's currently the research practice lead at Proficient, where she leads the research and analysis team to develop and promote the UX practice. And then we have Dr. Haubitz, who has been an advisor for us on World IA Day. So thank you, Dr. Haubitz, for being our advisor. He has a PhD from the University of Texas in Austin. And he brings over 10 years of experience in information architecture and an international background. And his expertise is social media, information architecture, usability, and interaction design. And last but not least, we have Bett Correa. Correa? Am I pronouncing that right? Okay. So Bett is currently a customer experience architect with Verizon. She has over 16 years of experience in IT with a focus on customer experience and enterprise architecture. So she's going to bring kind of that development side to this discussion. She's also the co-host of the Software Architecture Concepts podcast and a manager of the Verizon IT Leadership Development Program. So welcome all of our panelists.
I'm just going to switch mics real quick.
Oh, okay, thank you. Great. So that one's a little louder. So our theme today is architecting happiness, and we've touched a little bit upon that in each of the talks from today. But I think the first thing that we want to think about before we design for our app happiness is thinking about what that really means. So the first question I think I'd like to ask our panelists is kind of a philosophical one. What does user happiness mean to you? And I'm going to ask Seth if you want to take that one first.
Sure. So I think for me, it's really focusing on whether or not it enriches whoever you're designing for life in some way or manner. Because the end goal when you're designing something for someone is obviously to help them achieve some sort of task and in the easiest way possible. So if they can hit the easy button, know when they're done, and they actually enjoy using it and they're actively using it, I think that in some way, shape, or form it enriches their life, and I think that's really where the happiness lies.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Dr. Haubitz, what do you think about that from your perspective?
Yeah, thanks for asking. As Seth said, a happy user, of course, smile all over. What I think it's also important when it comes to happiness is also that the user returns. And, not only, just let them out, say, and see if things work or don't work. It's also, I think, for us as designers or who work basically in the field also of IA is that we have also happy customers, who are going to return. I think that's very important. And asking, what is happiness or what is not happiness? I have been really thinking about it also when we prepared that event. I think it's probably easier to ask, what it's not. And so anyway.
It's also important to measure, right?
Yeah. So that's what it means for me.
Okay, great. So when we're talking about user happiness, a good way to, I guess, communicate that is when you're measuring it. A lot of, leaders and organizations like to have hard numbers and data, but I guess there's different types of data. There's qualitative and quantitative. So, I guess, Karen, maybe you could take this one. What do you think are the best ways to measure user happiness?
Because it's such a subjective quality, the best thing that I would recommend is finding a way to make it objective somewhat. I mentioned in my talk the idea of product reaction cards, where it's a set of terms and responses that people can align to. You also, I think when you're measuring happiness and that subjective response, you want to try to do your best to control for the social bias of, I like it, I'm happy, I'm good with this. You have to make sure that you're getting an authentic response. And so anything that you can do to reassure the user that they can be very brutally honest if they aren't happy with something, we had the question about frustration, measuring frustration. I think that's an important point, what it isn't. Absolutely. And I think that's part of what you should work into it. So you have, there is a number of other tools too, the SUS, and I'm blanking on what the acronym means, but the SUS scale is 10 questions that talk about things in a little more abstraction. Not do you like it, but do you feel you need help using this? Do you feel that you would need guidance and support? Basically, how do you feel this experience is going to work for you? And in that, those responses, you can start to analyze out. So instead of a direct I like it, I don't like it, I'm happy, it makes me happy, you can kind of winnow out that idea. I would also say that kind of the first point also is happiness should be defined as the user defines happiness. So the happiness I feel for completing my tax software program to submit my taxes is going to be very different than the happiness I feel when I'm playing World of Warcraft. I'm going to just have a different level of measure of satisfaction that I come out with that, and making that contextual is a very important part of it. So whatever measurement tool you should be using, you should be considering that there's a contextual consideration of what happiness is in this.
So are there any examples of, metrics or anything that you would commonly look at, or does it vary based on the product that you're developing?
I don't know of any standardized pool, because again, it's a subjective measure. Does anybody else in the panel have an answer for that?
There's, for instance, something I think that's called the Oxford Happiness Questionnaire. That you can look up. I mean, what are other standardized tools? The satisfaction with life.
What was that again? I'm sorry, some people were writing
the Oxford Happiness Questionnaire. Oxford Happiness Questionnaire, that's what it is really called. And you can just look it up online. I think, 10, 16 questions, and it's widely used. Another one is Satisfaction with Life scale. That's also something that's out there. And of course, being like a social scientist, and research, of course, we also develop kind of our own skills, whenever we do kind of user research, user studies. As Karen just said, okay, it's not as much about, are you happy or are you unhappy? It's more like, how happy are you? To what degree? What is the kind of level? And I think that pretty much adds a little bit more, also for us as researchers, to know what's really going on. It also has to do with questionnaire design. Are you happy or are you unhappy is basically like a yes/no question, right? And I always prefer, also pretty much to measure maybe the extent of something, on a level from 1 to 5, 1 meaning you're not at all to 5 being a lot, how would you answer that? So that's just my turn.
Just one other, pass it on a second. I was just going to say that I don't know if no standardized measurement tools, but standardized scales across all things. But a lot of industries have user satisfaction surveys, and that can be a place, if you're in that industry, you can reference that.
I was just going to also mention mental models. And so that kind of is a diagram from beginning to end of the experience. And so some people call it moments of truth. And so those key performance indicators or those really important milestones within the journey, if you're able to put that test together and then measure, and it is still a little subjective, but you have to make sure they're unbiased questions, you can measure those moments as you go. But what happens, there's something called the Keno model, Keno, and Jared Spool talks on it. It's an amazing video. You should go watch it if you're interested. It's so awesome. But basically, when you create a new feature, it could be something really enjoyable, but then that starts to become an expected standard. And so then you have to kind of create something new or create it differently. So it's really, I think, about creating the passion and the pride for the brand, what is a real meaningful experience. But yeah, the mental model should help, and also that keynote presentation by Jared Spool is really great.
Great, thank you. I think Bett's going to follow up.
At the macro level, of course, you can measure your net promoter score. So like a company like Verizon, we would want to know how willing are people to promote our company to someone else and say, yes, you should definitely use this software or this system. So at the highest level, that's a very widely used industry standard.
Yeah, that's a good one too. All right, so I know Lara, you talked a little bit about how design and behavior and human behavior, and one of the things I think that we want to know is how can design impact human behavior? So Lara, yeah.
Well, I mean, look at the Fitbit, look at wearables, that's having a great impact on our lives. Mm-hmm. It's something wearable that's giving us data, it's measuring and tracking, it's motivating us to be more health conscious. So I think as we evolve with these new technologies, it's going to be really interesting. But then you have the problem of Google Glasses and then the privacy issue. So, some of these things are working really well and others have some really big problems that are not so happy if you're wearing the glasses and you're videotaping me and I'm like, wait, I'm having a bad hair day, or whatever it is, so basically we have to really think about what's meaningful, but I think those are some very interesting ways that it's affecting our human behavior today. I'm sure some of you might have thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I always think too is just how much of an impact companies' products have an effect on the stock market. The rise and fall of stock prices based on maybe how something looks and not necessarily how functional it is. And that's a very kind of a compelling story to tell. So this doesn't necessarily relate to design, but if you think about the impact the fires in the Tesla cars had on the stock price, and that's just human behavior. It's a reaction to something that happened, and it was a pretty big impact. You could see the drop in the stock price, and then you could see it come back up whenever Elon says something super.
Seth has Tesla stock.
Yeah, I do. But no, it's definitely interesting to see people's reactions to things in that respect, and that's purely from, I think, social. You look up on the boards and the stock prices, and you see people talking about this type of stuff, and they're all communicating about it. And people do the same thing with the designs of different products that they use. If you think about all the the Apple products that have come out, and how the impact of maybe the newest version of the iPad has come out, what kind of impact that has on people, and whether or not they're going to buy it, whether they're going to tell their friend, oh, I don't think it looks that great, I'm not going to buy it. Just those things. It's very organic. It's very chaotic, but at the same time, it affects people at a very deep level.
I would just say that design always affects human behavior. We either measure it or we don't. It may be disruptive, and things like the Apple and the Fitbit, you really notice it, you really catch it. But I think design is about emotion at its root, and we're emotional beings. We can't help it, and the process of that is going to affect the behavior. It may be a bigger shift in some things than others, but it's going to have an impact. And I think that as designers, that puts a great deal of responsibility on us. To keep that in mind always, even if it's just we're looking for a little shift of improvement, as opposed to we're going to totally change what people think about an industry or a market or a product the way some of these other companies have done.
There's a really interesting book called Dataclysm, and it's written by the chief data architect and co-founder of OkCupid. So very interesting things about human behavior. And there's a lot of research in there on how they did different design changes that impacted how people decided who they wanted to date. So the size of the picture and where the text was laid out. And also they tried something where it's like called blind date test, and you would go out with someone that you saw the picture of. So they did a lot of really interesting testing. That book is really interesting to see how design impacts, and they have so much data. So it's a really interesting study.
Great, that does sound interesting. I'm married, so I don't know anything about OkCupid. Right, honey? My husband's back there. Okay, do we have any questions from the audience? We've been kind of sitting up here having a one-sided conversation, so we want to make it a little bit more interactive.
Yeah, questions very welcome.
No? Okay, we got one more, or one out there.
Hi, again, my name's David. I have a friend, speaking of Tesla, who just picked up a brand new red Model S out in Brandon last Thursday. This friend, he's an older gentleman, he's retired. He can't check his own email. That's how technically savvy he is. However, he's able to, for the most part, own and operate this Tesla car, and it's just totally blowing him away. It's an incredible product. So just in terms of successful, user interface stories, I think the Tesla Model S is an incredible example of that, because it's literally a computer on wheels. A wireless computer on wheels. I mean, the technology is amazing, but it doesn't intimidate him, and he's able to do everything he wants to do. He even has his songs in the car, and he was he worked in the music business, and he is tickled to death with this car. And this is a man who can't check his own email. So, anyway.
Now I think that warms our heart when we hear those good stories about good design. So thank you for sharing that. Okay, Amy, in a minute.
Hi, I'm Tammy. I have a question about probably more the culture some of you may have worked in. If you have any examples of where you've had to make a case as an evangelist for happiness, whereas the CFO or the HIPPO, the highest paid person in the room, doesn't see the ROI on that, the dreaded. How do we attach that to something of value to those in making the decisions?
So I had a lot of experience on probably, over 150 projects creating, products for people in that respect. And I think the argument comes in when you start to drive home the concept of how much money it's costing them to not factor in information architecture, UI design, all this, everything. And once you start to kind of make that case and you identify where that gap is, then it starts to resonate with them. So if you think about, and we're talking kind of about software development. If you're talking about what does it take to create a product from start to finish, maybe it's 6 months. And throughout that 6-month course, you don't have anybody factoring any type of usability analysis, and they're not doing any testing or anything of that nature. you have the product, launch after the 6 months, and then, you're sitting there and you've got these people using it, and then you start to see people just abandoning parts of the application because, it takes too long to do something, they start to have issues. And then you start to tie the time that they go back to doing it the manual way or whatever it is to, a cost analysis, and then you figure out, well, it's costing you X much more in order to accomplish a specific task. If you had actually spent that money on the UI design in the beginning, then you wouldn't have that problem in the end.
Yeah, it's actually pretty hard to measure the positives that we do. It's much easier to measure when what we do is absent and it costs a lot of things. I said users kill software they don't like and they find an unhappy experience with. I'm thinking we have rolled out a new time tracking system that is universally reviled in my company. It is such a painful user experience. And I think about the amount of time that we individually beat on it, then we call somebody, then we write an IT ticket. Probably in the less than a year it's been out, I'm sure we've lost at least $1 million. I can't quantify that with data, but I bet I could probably come up with a good extension model to do that. But it's much easier to measure it that way. You can also look at, I know there's a great story that Jared Spool has out about I think it's a $3 million button, if I'm remembering the numbers right, where he actually, he went to a client. They said, "We think we know what we need to do. We need to just change this website." And he said, "Well, wait. Let's actually look at what's really failing here." And it turns out that they were going to make the wrong solution. They knew they had a problem. They were going to make the wrong solution, and so they did a test, and they found that a better solution. And all of a sudden, and this was an e-commerce site. I think it was a B2B commerce site actually, and all of a sudden, sales just shot through the roof. $3 million more within the measure. I don't know if that was a quarter or a month, but it was just a massive number associated with this change because they measured that.
I do think it's our job to know the business goals. And so when you can bring it back, especially at a stakeholder level, C-levels, you have to bring it back to the business goals. We can, even if you can't give exact numbers, if you can say, based on this, we can increase customers by this, or we are losing this estimated number of customers, or, it's taking our IT time, our team, like 3 times as long to create this process. Instead, if you look over the next year of our schedule, we're going to save X number of hours, and those equate into this many dollars into our IT team. So yeah, I think it does come, a lot of times with stakeholders, C-level, business goals and numbers are what they hear, and how you can influence that a little bit.
Hey guys, over here. I'd like to go to bat for the solopreneurs, the indie people, and the startups. What recommendations and advice do you have for small budgets and teams?
In what regard, advice for integrating these processes within the...
Exactly. When you're working with maybe less than standard abilities, you have a limited number of people, a limited number of dollars. Do you have tools, techniques, or any other things for smaller groups?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that all of what we've talked about today can be done to a greater or lesser extent. I think Lara mentioned the idea of breaking the rules and putting something out on Craigslist and just finding people who you can engage for very little. Sometimes, if you don't have the manpower within your organization, you don't have enough people to do the work, that can be a problem. But I've certainly done a lot of guerrilla types of studies that says, okay, I need to get data here, and I don't have corporate support and blessing, and it's the same kind of mentality. Probably the most unusual was usability testing in a bar. The product manager said, I'll cover the first 2 rounds of drinks and some munchies, and so we took our design into a bar, met with some people that we kind of networked with and pulled in, and we got some good data from it. Just have to be very creative with that, but I think, again, it's more about some data is better than no data, and I think that being as creative as you can about how to get to the people who can give you that data is pretty important.
Yeah, I think, but it also comes down to, okay, if you don't have the manpower, then you will just be a team of one, right? So you basically have to do it by yourself. There's never an ideal situation, and of course it all depends on the budget, people you might have available, like with the appropriate skill set, etc. For instance, also, like Karen covered, like usability testing. Of course, if you know a little bit more about usability testing, you know that there are sometimes like usability labs out there, right? And they are kind of expensive, but there's also, pretty much the way, like not maybe necessarily like in a pub or so, but like kind of low budget usability testing, just in front of a computer, and just taking notes by observing people. You do not need like any kind of expensive software, like eye tracking and all these things out there. Of course, if you can do that, great, but quite often, you might, in particular, if you're a small company, you might not be in a situation to be able to do that or to afford it.
Don't forget your friends and family.
That's what they're there for.
Yeah, and that recruit liberally grade on a curve. And it's not only usability testing. Usability testing is probably the easiest low-hanging fruit to get into place because there are a lot of guerrilla usability studies. But even doing research, going to meetups with the right users, that's not your meetups, that's their meetups, what they're interested in. So going to them and taking the time to go there and again, recognizing the value of the data that you bring.
Okay, so I think we have time for one more question.
Hi, I'm David. I'm actually a student at USF. And I have a lot of ideas flowing in my mind of things I want to create. I'm wondering what's your opinion on sites like Squarespace that try and sell designs already. And I'm wondering if this is going to reduce the integrity or usefulness of sites, I guess, or if they're actually helpful and help people create things faster.
I think that, and this kind of goes to your bootstrap idea there, part of the talk that you were talking about is when you have kind of like this canned UI or some sort of framework that is set up already, it does limit you to a degree, but you can get creative with it. I don't have any experience with Squarespace, but I have an understanding of what it is. It's kind of like these pre-existing templates that you can arrange, to create a certain thing. And I think it just goes exactly along the lines with what she talked about is maybe if you're beginning and it's not necessarily a concern for you to have this very unique website, maybe you're just starting a mom and pop business and you need something out of the box really quick, that's fine. But if you're looking to cater something specifically to a group of people, then chances are that you're probably better off doing something a little bit more custom and a little bit more focused and doing some incremental tests over time to find out if it is something that they enjoy using or not.
Yes, I'm just going to add to that because I do use Squarespace to design for really simple websites. And they have really good integration for things like Google Analytics and everything. And the thing that I really like about them is that you have control over certain aspects of the layout, which I haven't found easy in other systems.
I think the faster you can get something in front of a real user and find out if you're even on the right track, do it. So find out if you're even on the right track. And read Lean Startup by Eric Ries.
Yeah, it depends on if it will make the user happy, right?
I think that's it.
Oh, and I was
Go ahead,
just going to
Laura.
say there's also a book called Lean or UX.
Lean UX.
Lean UX. No, it was the UX Team of One by Leah Bully. That was a good one. But also just one more thing is I just created a site for like a little cancer clinic, and we specifically used WordPress because they were not technology savvy. So we wanted to help them be able to update it themselves. So we specifically used WordPress because we knew it would be easy for them to continually update their content, and it wasn't a very complex site. or like a portfolio site. Totally, those things make sense. But when you get into, something more complex, then you really should think about the solution that makes sense for that project.
All right, everybody. Well, I do want to thank our panelists. Please give them a round of applause.